Here's Ali.
Welcome to the show, and I'd like to start by welcoming my two co-hosts today. We have Dr. Susan Strauss.
Hi, Ali. I'm delighted to be here again.
So good to be with you, Susan.
Thank you.
And also we have Caroline Moores. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
All right. Well, good to see you again. And we are going to be talking to Kristy Blick. She is the board chair and founder of Elimu Africa. Welcome, Kristy.
Thank you. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
Well, we are so happy to have you.
Thank you.
I'd like to point out Caroline is also a board member.
That's correct. Yes. Very fresh, though. I was very recently introduced to Kristy and her wonderful nonprofit, and I have to start with saying how terribly impressed I am with your dedication and your generosity, and I am honored to be part of your Elimu Africa nonprofit.
Likewise,
Thank you.
We're extremely lucky to have you, too.
Thank you.
Well, let's start out by learning a little bit more about Elimu. And
Yes, I would be honored to ask the first question. So, Kristy, please tell us what Elimu stands for, what it does, and how you decided to found this organization.
Okay, well, Elimu is a Swahili word, which is the national language of Tanzania, and it means education. And I took back in 2003, the youngest of our two daughters graduated from high school and went off to college. And even though I had a job and lots of things about my life I loved, I felt kind of a gap and kind of a pause in my life. And so I took some time to think about what do I want to do with this next chapter of my life. And it culminated into a 8-week volunteer trip to Tanzania.
That is substantial, 8 weeks. A lot of people go for 1 or 2 weeks, right?
It's a long commitment.
It was wonderful to have been able to go there and really feel immersed
Right.
in life there.
Right.
And you said that your experience that you thought you were going to be spending time in an orphanage, and then it morphed into something much greater. Perhaps you can tell us how that happened.
Well, this is quite a long story. I'll try to summarize this as best I can. But I met this woman by the name of Lucy Renju, who is this extremely intelligent, feisty Tanzanian lady. And she had started this school called the Second Chance Education Center to tutor and help the kids who had fallen through the cracks of government school. School over in Tanzania is not free, and so many families, they live on like $1 or $2 a day, and they can't afford to send their kids to school. So it's really a privilege to be able to attend. So as I was speaking with Mama Lucy, she looked at me and said, "So Kristy, when are you going to come and teach at the school?" And I found myself saying, "Tomorrow."
Yeah.
She's not a lady you would ever say no to. So I got involved with that school, and that was kind of the start of everything.
And was that school for both boys and girls? Because I know now your
Yeah.
emphasis is on girls.
Right. We have a
Okay.
special, we help schools with boys and girls, but we do have a special emphasis on helping support education of women and girls.
Okay.
But yeah, they had boys and girls at their school, and these were kids who have very, very poor backgrounds. And I started out trying to teach English, and I realized that I only speak English, and I don't really understand how to explain English and concepts to them. And so we decided my energies would be better used by visiting the families in their homes. And that turned out to be the most heartrending and profound experience of my whole trip.
well, as I was hearing you talk, Kristy, I was just thinking, to go to someplace like Africa and spend 8 weeks, and how did you? Was this something just that you'd always wanted to do, or how did you just come to this decision and just say, I'm going to take 8 weeks? I mean, most people might say, well, let me try with a week or two, I think, just to be safe. But tell us about what drove you to do this.
Well, always, when my kids were younger, I felt like my biggest focus was to stay there and get them raised. So I hadn't thought about a long-term volunteer trip, but anytime I ever heard about somebody going on an abroad volunteer trip, it just always, there was something about it that really intrigued me. And so during this kind of pause after my daughter went off to college, I thought, it just started out with this little seed of an idea, and I thought, why couldn't I do that? And then the more I researched it, I thought, rather than go for a short time, I would like to go there and really get acclimated and know what it feels like to live there and understand the issues and get to know people and meet friends. And so I just decided to jump in and do the long one. And I'm so glad I did. It was almost not enough time. I miss my family, my home, but I had a hard time leaving, too.
I can imagine that. Yeah.
Were you able to do any Skype? I mean, pull in any sort of technology there? Because they didn't have any internet, I suppose.
They did. They actually had internet cafes, and they even had latte.
Oh,
really?
Yes. But there was there was Skype back then. I'm not a very good technological person, so I didn't know how to use it. So I did email, and I sent a journal each week to my family and friends, just talking about, every night I would journal everything that happened, because there was so much that happened every day that I knew I wouldn't be able to remember all of it. So.
And Kristy, if I remember correctly from the very first board meeting that I attended, we have one board member who was really drawn in by your weekly journals, right?
I would think.
Right. So tell us some of the stories that really touched you while you were there, please.
Well, one of them, and this friend is my friend Larry Fino, who read my journals, and he actually ended up raising money to put into my bank account so that I could donate it to the school. But I think one of the stories probably that reached people the most was my description of my visits to the homes of these kids. So we loaded the kids up into the back of a lorry, which was my English lesson I had to teach the kids.
And a lorry is a...
It's a truck, which at the time I didn't know what it was. But we, and with an interpreter and with a man who was able to drive us, and we would drive, and these kids were walking at least an hour or two to school, I realized.
Oh, wow.
And one of the kids would bang on the window, and they'd say, pull over, and we'd hike over some trails and around a hill, and then we would come to these houses, and the families would come outside to meet us. And some of the stories, and these people were so lovely, they were gracious, and they were so thankful for the opportunity for their child to come to school, but lived in some really tough circumstances. Like there was a set of grandparents who they were raising 2 different sets of grandkids, and all they had in their house were mattresses on the floor. There was a single dad, had 6 children. His wife had died after giving birth to their youngest, and he had to drop the baby off at an orphanage because he couldn't afford formula for that child. There was a young mother who was very weak, and I could tell she was sick, and it turned out that she'd had malaria, and she was collecting money from relatives, and when she had enough, she would go and get medication for treatment. So I wrote these stories, and these stories were heartrending.
How did you find this organization to do any international volunteer work? Did you just Google international volunteer? And
I did. And I came up, the organization I went with is called Cross Cultural Solutions. And as I read about it, I just liked what they provide housing, and they provided a volunteer job and some cultural teaching. And I thought that sounded really appealing, especially for someone who had never gone on a trip like that. It was a good way to go. And it was a great experience going that way.
And you have to pay for it all, though,
Yes,
correct?
yeah.
Okay, food and everything.
Yeah, they charged a fee per week, and that included all of those services. So I did pay for that.
So, I know you've talked about some of the family issues and some of the sickness and spoke about the school, but help us understand a little bit better what is the fundamental problem with the schools and it sounds like the lack of being able to get those resources. Why is this work so important?
Well, like I said before, school isn't free, and many of these families they're barely making it, let alone primary school doesn't have tuition anymore, but they still have to pay about $30 a year for uniforms and stationaries, as they call them, and a guard and food and things like that. And most families can't afford that. So that's a barrier. And also, sometimes the parents don't understand the value of education for their children, and so they're not encouraging them to study, or they'll keep them home to do chores, or especially the girls and young
Out of
women.
necessity, too, right? Because
Right.
there are so
Yeah,
many
they
things
need the
that need
help.
to be done.
Yeah, and the young girls especially are kept home often. Often, sometimes these young women become pregnant, and they're forced to quit school because of that, and it's kind of considered their fault too. So that usually ends their education.
Yeah. And Kristy, I'm wondering, please tell us, what is government's perspective on what Elimu Africa is doing? Local government, are they aware of your projects? How do they respond?
I don't know if they are.
Right.
And I think really there are lots of different organizations that are doing different things over there
Sure.
with health and education and all kinds of things. So I'm not sure if they are really aware. That's a good question.
Well, and it's telling that you don't know whether they are, right? Because if you would think if they are very invested in education, they might be aware of anyone who is working in that space.
Yeah, that's
So
a
it's-
really good point.
Were you in a small village or community? And what was the name of it, and what was the population?
You know, the name of the village I lived in was called Rao, and it was kind of a suburb, if you will, of Moshi village, and it's near Mount Kilimanjaro. So a lot of tourists go to that area because they climb the mountain or go on safari. I'm not sure the population of Rao, but I can say that, most of the people lived in, a hut with mud walls and a drape over the door and a pot outside to cook over. And then some had electricity and running water, so it was a big combination. They had a community tap that people would carry those big buckets of water on their head, back to their home to use. But yeah, as far as the size of it, I don't know, but it was I loved living there. And one of my favorite things was just to go out walking and have little kids come up to me and hold my hand, and we'd skip, and something I wouldn't be doing in Maple Grove, probably.
And were they enthralled with your blonde hair?
They were, yes. 'Cause
Yes.
Good question.
Well, and they call European or American travels Mzungu. And so everywhere I went, little kids would say, Mzungu, Mzungu, and then they'd run up to me and hold my hand. Or they would call me teacher. I think they might assume that I was a teacher, a volunteer teacher. But that was one of my favorite things to do.
And this is so telling, right? Because we have found the population in Tanzania to be so very welcoming, so very friendly, despite all their struggles. And that really is a huge lesson for us, right?
Yeah.
We're often spoiled, right? And
Very
we often
much,
don't
yeah.
realize how fortunate we are. And I think that their generosity, their kindness, and their welcoming nature is a great lesson for all of us.
I did, and I really did want to take that home with me, too. Just as a guest, they just make you feel any guest that they have, they make you feel so welcome, and they're just so gracious and
Right,
really
right.
lovely people. But at Elimu Africa, we kind of started with that little seed that my friend Larry planted that people would send money over, and I thought, so people would donate money for this. And then coincidentally, my roommate in Tanzania turned out to be a local artist named Toni Dachis from St. Louis Park. So
Wow.
she and I hit it off. She's a wonderful
Small
person.
world.
We just could not believe
Right,
it.
right.
And so she and I came back and started raising money for the school. And then through some more serendipitous processes, I would say, two other people found us. One is a school teacher in St. Cloud, Dick McMorrow, and he takes an annual student trip to Tanzania now and visits our projects.
Oh.
Which again, he could
How
have lived in New
valuable, right,
Zealand or
for the
anywhere.
students.
Oh, yes, life-changing for them. And a young medical student from California found us. So the four of us got together and we decided to get a nonprofit. And that's how Elimu started back in 2008.
Okay.
And we have 4 projects that we're supporting right now, and I'm really happy to say that 98.7% of our funds coming in go straight to our projects. So we have very
That's
low.
impressive.
Incredible.
And that's one of the things that really impressed me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we like
that's
to keep it
huge.
simple, what we're doing.
What are your 4 projects?
Well, we have 2 pre and primary schools that we support, and we have provided funds for textbooks, computers, teachers' chairs. They didn't have chairs to sit on to grade
Oh.
their papers. Chalkboards, all kinds of different things like that. My husband and I went back to Tanzania in this year, and got to see the computers and the textbooks the kids were using, and it was just so wonderful to see in person
I
the
bet.
effects of this. We have a girls' secondary school that we provided bunk beds for, which is, we think it's important for girls to board at school for the safe and effective learning environment for them. And we have a women's educational and empowerment organization that I love
love
this
it.
project the most. And we have supplied funds for sewing machines, pigs and chickens, and solar panels for them. And as a group, they share skills. Like some of them are tailors, and so they've taught one another some tailoring skills, and they're making handbags and different things to sell. They are each getting some pigs and chickens to raise and sell the offspring, and they share the income, and then they also have meetings about their rights as women. For example, it's against the law to be abused. And we actually had one woman go home and tell her husband to stop it, and he left.
Wow.
And she has an income of her own coming in, so her life has been totally transformed by
Wow.
this
Talking
group.
about
That's
empowering
great.
women.
Oh, big
Wow,
time.
Kristy,
And I got to meet her too. It was so awesome.
Well, I have to just tell you, I am just so impressed with what you have done, and really, what a beautiful story of
It
how
is.
you, with your vision, have changed the world, and just combining forces with these people that you spoke about. The four of you came together, and now look what you've done. I mean, this is amazing work. So thank you for doing
Well,
what you are
thank
doing.
you.
And congratulations
Appreciate that.
on seeing the vision and having it come forward to
Thank
help
you.
women, especially.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, there's been a lot
And you
of
are
help
so
with that.
dedicated. You should be in one of her board meetings. It's just wonderful.
Well, we wish you, all the best, and would hope that you come back and give us an update
Would
on the
love to.
progress of the school. And thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me too.
It was good to meet you.
And you too.
Thank you.